The screaming cut through the crystalline silence of the Vorthok temple like a plasma blade through flesh. Commander Kaovex froze mid-step on the ancient stone pathway, his neural implants immediately cataloging the sound. Human, juvenile, approximately 7 years old, in extreme distress. Around him, the towering alien priests of Vorthok Prime continued their ritualistic humming, their six-eyed faces serene as they processed toward the great altar. Their scaled hands clutched ceremonial staffs that pulsed with bioluminescent light, casting eerie shadows across the cavern walls. The sound meant nothing to them, just another offering to their stone god. But Kale knew that cry. It was the same sound his younger brother Nyx had made when the hegemony soldiers dragged him away. 15 years ago, the diplomatic mission to establish trade relations with the Vorthok seemed insignificant now. Ambassador Lythe was somewhere behind him, probably still adjusting her translator nodes and muttering about proper protocol. The rest of the human delegation moved like sleepwalkers, overwhelmed by the temple's psychoactive spores that kept visiting species. Compliant during ceremonies. Another scream echoed from the altar chamber ahead. Kale's combat training kicked in, his enhanced reflexes mapping escape routes, even as his diplomatic conditioning urged restraint. The Vorthok were humanity's newest potential allies in the ongoing war against the Keth Empire. One wrong move here could doom billions. The processional path wound deeper into the mountain, carved from living rock that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Vorthok architecture was notorious for its biological integration walls that breathed, floors that sensed footsteps, ceilings that wept nutrient-rich fluids. The temple was alive, and it was hungry as they rounded the final bend. The altar chamber opened before them like a cathedral of nightmares. The ceiling soared into darkness, supported by pillars of fused bone and metal. At the center stood the Weeping Stona, massive obsidian monolith that the Vorthok claimed was their god, made manifest, at its base, bound with neural restraints. That glowed with cruel efficiency, knelt 12 human children. Kale's blood turned to ice. The kids couldn't have been older than 10, their faces streaked with tears and terror. They wore the simple gray uniforms of colonial refugees, probably from one of the Outer Rim settlements that had been relocated during the Keth expansion. The lead priest, High Incarnate Yothek, raised his staff. When he spoke, his words translated through the temple's bioacoustic system with disturbing clarity. Behold, honored guests of Terra, today you witness the communion of sorrows, where young suffering feeds the stone's wisdom. These offerings will grant us victory over our mutual enemies. Kale felt Ambassador Lythe's hand grip his arm in warning. Around them, the other Vorthok delegates watched with expectant faces. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was a test. They wanted to see if humanity was willing to sacrifice innocence for military advantage. The first child, a girl with dark hair matted with fierce sweat, was lifted toward the stone's surface, where her tears touched the obsidian veins of sickly light, began to spread. Every instinct Kale possessed screamed at him to act. His sidearm felt heavy against his thigh, his neural combat protocols cycling through strike patterns and casualty assessments. He could probably save half the children before the Vorthok overwhelmed him, but doing so would mean war. Billions would die in the vacuum of space, torn apart by Keth warfleets that humanity couldn't face alone. The girl's scream cut through his calculations like a blade through his soul. Kale stepped forward. Stop. The single word echoed through the cathedral chamber with surprising authority. Kale stepped past Ambassador Lythe's restraining hand, his combat boots ringing against the living stone floor. Every Vorthok head turned toward him. There, 6 eyes reflecting the altar's bioluminescent glow like predatory beacons. High Incarnate Yothek lowered his staff, tilting his elongated skull in what might have been curiosity or annoyance. The Terraspawn speaks out of turn. Does your species not understand the sacred nature of this communion? I understand it perfectly. Kale's voice carried the flat, dangerous tone he'd learned in the war zones of Kepler 442. "You're torturing children to power your weapon systems." A collective hiss rose from the assembled priests. Ambassador Lythe stepped forward, her diplomatic training overriding panic. "Commander Vex speaks from emotional unfamiliarity with your customs, High Incarnate. Perhaps we could observe the ceremony from a more appropriate distance." "No." Kale moved closer to the altar, noting how the Vorthok guards shifted their grip on their neural disruptors. "Those are human children. Colonial refugees. Where did you get them?" Yothek's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. The Keth were most generous in their trade agreements. They provide us with suffering essence in exchange for our bioweapons. A profitable arrangement for all concerned. The pieces clicked together in Kale's mind with horrifying clarity. The Keth hadn't just been conquering human colonies, they'd been harvesting the survivors, trading them to the Vorthok like livestock, and now humanity's own diplomats were being shown this atrocity as a demonstration of their potential allies' power. The girl at the altar whimpered as neural tendrils extended from the stone surface, seeking to interface with her brainstem. Once connected, her consciousness would be slowly drained to feed the temple's biocomputational matrix. The process would take hours. "The communion grants us strategic wisdom," Yothek continued, apparently enjoying the human delegation's discomfort. "Each mind consumed adds to our collective intelligence. Your species' capacity for suffering is particularly nutritious." Kale felt something cold and final settle in his chest. He'd seen this calculation before, during the massacre at Seti. Good people doing nothing while innocents died for the greater good. The same logic that had let his brother disappear into a hegemony detention center, while their parents signed voluntary relocation papers. Commander Lythe hissed urgently. "You're endangering the entire alliance. Think of the bigger picture." "I am thinking of it." Kale's hand moved to his sidearm with practiced smoothness. "And the picture includes not letting monsters eat children while we watch." The Vorthok guards reacted instantly, their neural disruptors crackling to life. But Kale had spent 15 years preparing for moments like this. His enhanced reflexes, boosted by military-grade combat stims, let him draw and fire before the aliens could complete their targeting sequences. The plasma bolt took Yothek's center mass, his ceremonial robes erupting in flames as he crashed into the altar steps. The temple's bioacoustic system shrieked in harmonic discord as emergency pheromones flooded the chamber. Chaos erupted. The Vorthok guards opened fire, their energy beams scorching the air where Kale had been standing a microsecond before he rolled behind one of the bone pillars, already calculating angles and ammunition counts. 12 children to extract, 40+ hostiles, limited cover, and allies who were probably going to try to stop him. Ambassador Lythe was screaming into her unit, calling for immediate extraction. The other human delegates had scattered, their diplomatic immunity suddenly feeling very theoretical. Kale popped up from cover and put 2 more plasma bolts into the nearest guards. The neural restraints holding the children were biometrically locked. He'd need to get close to override them, which meant crossing 30 meters of open ground while under fire from weapons that could dissolve his molecular structure. The first child, the dark-haired girl, caught his eye across the chaos. Her tear-streaked face showed not just terror, now, but hope. She'd seen him kill her captors. She believed he could save her, just like Nyx had believed. Right up until the end, Kale checked his weapons charge indicator and stepped out of cover. Time to find out if 15 years of guilt could be worth something, after all. The plasma fire turned the temple into a light show of death. Kale sprinted across the open ground in a zigzag pattern, his neural implants calculating trajectories and threat assessments faster than conscious thought. Energy beams seared past his head, leaving the acrid smell of ionized air in their wake. The Vorthek's bioweapons were devastating, but slow to recharge. Kale had maybe a 3-second window between volleys enough Time to close distance, if he moved like his life depended on it, which it did. He dove behind the altar's base, as another barrage of neural fire swept across his previous position. The obsidian stone loomed above him, its surface now crawling with angry red veins that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. The thing was reacting to the violence, feeding on the terror and pain flooding the chamber. The first child was only meters away, her restraints sparking as the temple's biosystems went into emergency mode. Kale could see the neural interface probes withdrawing from her scalp, leaving tiny wounds that wept blood and cerebrospinal fluid. Hold still, kid. He jammed his combat knife into the restraint mechanism's control node. The Vorthok biotech was sophisticated but fragile, too much electromagnetic interference, and it simply shut down. The blade's monomolecular edge sliced through the organic circuits like butter. The girl's eyes went wide as the restraints fell away. Are you really human? Yeah, and so are you, which means nobody gets to use you as a battery. Kale helped her to her feet, noting the tremor in her hands and the dilation of her pupils. The neural probes had already begun their work. She'd need immediate medical attention to prevent permanent brain damage. There are more of us, she whispered, pointing toward the other bound children. They took us from New Harmony Colony. My brother Dex is over there. A plasma bolt scorched the stone's surface inches from Kale's head. The Vorthok had reorganized their firing pattern, coordinating their attacks to pin him down. Professional soldiers, not just ceremonial guards. Ambassador Lythe's voice crackled through the temple's comm system. Commander Vex, you are ordered to stand down immediately. This is an act of war against a sovereign species. Kale didn't bother responding. He'd crossed that line the moment he pulled his weapon. Now there was only the mission. Extract 12 human children from an alien temple while outnumbered 20-1 by hostiles with superior firepower. He'd faced worse odds on Kepler-442. The second child was a boy, maybe 8 years old, his face pale with shock. Kale repeated the restraint-cutting procedure, his enhanced reflexes making the work look effortless, despite the energy fire whining overhead. Can you run? He asked the boy. I think so. But they did something to Marashi. Hasn't moved since they brought us down here. Kale followed the boy's gaze to a girl slumped in her restraints at the far end of the altar. Her head lolled at an unnatural angle, neural fluid still dripping from the probe sites. Too late for her, but not for the others. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. The Vorthok had brought in reinforcements. He could hear their chittering battle cries echoing from the tunnel entrances. Heavy weapons too, judging by the subsonic hum building in the chamber walls. But something else was changing. The obsidian stone was reacting to the violence in ways that its builders probably hadn't anticipated. The red veins were spreading, faster now, forming complex patterns that hurt to look at directly. And the children who'd been freed were staring at it with an odd mixture of fear and recognition. It's trying to talk to us, the first girl said quietly. Ever since they started the ceremony, I can hear it thinking. Kale felt ice form in his stomach. What kind of thinking? Hungry thoughts, but also ... lonely ones. I think it's been alone for a very long time. The stone pulsed brighter, and suddenly Kale could feel it. To a vast alien consciousness pressing against his enhanced neural implants. Ancient beyond human comprehension, powerful beyond measure, and utterly, catastrophically insane from millennia of isolation. The Vorthok hadn't been feeding its children to gain wisdom. They'd been keeping it pacified, and now that the ceremony was interrupted, it was waking up. A sound like breaking glass echoed through the chamber, followed by a wave of psychic pressure that sent half the Vorthok guards to their knees. The stone's surface began to crack, revealing something that moved beneath the obsidian shell. Oh hell, Kale muttered, cutting through another set of restraints. Everyone who can move, get to the tunnel entrance. Now? What about the others? The first girl asked. Kale looked at the remaining children, still bound to their restraints, then at the stone, as hairline fractures spread across its surface. Whatever was inside was about to break free, and when it did, everything in this chamber was going to die, unless he could give it something else to focus on. He checked his weapon's charge one more time and smiled grimly. "Leave the others to me." The stone cracked like an eggshell, birthing nightmares. Kale shoved the freed children toward the tunnel entrance as reality began to warp around the fracturing monolith. The air itself seemed to scream as something vast and wrong pressed against the barriers between dimensions. The Vorthot guards had stopped firing, their weapons forgotten, as they stared in religious terror at their god's awakening. "Go, go, go," Kale shouted to the children, but his voice was lost in the subsonic roar emanating from the stone. The remaining bound kids were convulsing in their restraints as psychic feedback overloaded their developing nervous systems. Whatever, lived, inside that obsidian shell had been dreaming for millennia, and its dreams were about to become everyone else's nightmare. A section of the stone's surface peeled away like rotted flesh, revealing something that Kale's enhanced vision couldn't quite process. It shifted between states of matter, sometimes appearing as crystalline lattice of impossible geometry, other times as writhing organic masses that defied classification. Neural fire wouldn't scratch it. Plasma weapons would be like throwing snowballs at a supernova. But children were still dying, and Kale had made his choice 15 years too late to save his brother. He sprinted toward the altar's far end where 3 kids remained bound. The psychic pressure was incredible now, like trying to think while someone drove nails into his skull. His neural implants were overloading, throwing error messages across his visual field in cascading red text. The first child he reached was already gone, his nervous system fried by psychic feedback. But the second, a girl with auburn hair, was still breathing. Kale jammed his knife into her restraints, just as a tendril of living shadow erupted from the stone's surface. The thing that touched his mind was older than human civilization and hungry beyond mortal comprehension. It had been feeding on the slow torment of sacrifice victims for so long that their suffering had become the only reality it knew. Now, with its carefully maintained diet interrupted, it was starving. "Feed me," it whispered directly into Kale's consciousness. "Give me pain and terror and the sweet dissolution of hope. Give me what you gave me before." Kale's enhanced combat conditioning kicked in, compartmentalizing the psychic intrusion. "I'm not Vorthok, you cosmic parasite. Find your own damn food." The entity's attention focused on him with the weight of a collapsing star. In that moment, Kale saw its true nature, not a god or a demon, but something far worse. A self-aware virus that had infected this dimension eons ago, spreading from world to world by convincing primitive species to feed it their young. Earth was next on its menu. "You taste of vengeance and guilt," it observed, with clinical interest. "Such delicious flavors. You blame yourself for a death you could not prevent. You burn with the need to atone for imagined failures. Yes, you will serve admirably." More tendrils emerged from the cracking stone, wrapping around the remaining children like loving caresses, where they touched flesh. The kids began to age rapidly, their youth and vitality being drained to feed the entity's awakening. Kale cut the last child free, a boy who couldn't have been older than 6. The kid was barely conscious, his life force already partially consumed. He wouldn't survive the trek back to the surface without immediate medical intervention. The freed children huddled together near the tunnel entrance, too terrified to flee alone. Ambassador Lythe was nowhere to be seen, probably already extracted to the orbital station. The human diplomatic mission had become a rescue operation, and Kale was the only operator left. The entity's psychic tendrils probed deeper into his mind, tasting memories of war and loss. "Show me the moment you failed your brother. Let me savor his final despair. Get out of my head." Kale raised his plasma rifle toward the stone's writhing mass. The weapon was useless against the entity itself, but maybe he could damage its anchor point force it back into whatever dimensional prison it had escaped from. Futile. But your defiance adds spice to the meal. Yes, struggle more. Make your defeat meaningful. The temple shuddered as the entity's awakening reached critical mass. Chunks of living stone fell from the ceiling, and the bioluminescent walls began to pulse in rhythm with its alien heartbeat. The Vorthok priests were chanting in harmonics that hurt to hear, welcoming their god's return. Kale looked at the terrified children, then at the growing tear in reality where the stone had been. In a few more minutes, the entity would be fully manifested. It would consume every human in the star system, then spread to Earth itself. Unless someone gave it a reason to stay distracted. He thought of Nyx, 7 years old, and crying as the hegemony soldiers dragged him away. He thought of all the battles he'd won and lost, all the people he'd failed to save, all the guilt he'd carried like a stone in his chest for 15 years. Hey, he shouted at the writhing mass of shadow and nightmare. You want to taste real pain? Come and get it. Kale dropped his weapon and walked toward the entity's reaching tendrils with his arms spread wide. The entity's touch was like drowning in liquid fire. Kale felt his consciousness being peeled apart, layer by layer. Each memory and sensation catalogued with surgical precision. The creature fed on suffering the way humans breathed, was metabolic necessity rather than cruelty, which somehow made it worse. Exquisite, it whispered, as it tasted his grief over Nyx's death. Such pure self-recrimination. You blame yourself for a child's fate you had no power to change. Delicious paradox. Kale gritted his teeth against the psychic invasion. His enhanced neural implants were shorting out under the assault, throwing sparks that left the taste of copper in his mouth. But he could feel the entity's attention, shifting away from the children, drawn to the richer feast of an adult mind, seasoned with decades of trauma. Behind him, he heard small footsteps moving toward the tunnel entrance. The freed kids were finally running. Good. Why do you sacrifice yourself for them? The entity asked, with genuine curiosity. They are not your offspring. Their survival provides you no evolutionary advantage. Humans don't just save family. Kale managed between waves of psychic agony. We save each other. It's what makes us worth saving. The creature paused in its feeding, momentarily confused by the concept. In its eons of existence, it had consumed millions of species across thousands of worlds. Most had been willing to sacrifice their young to preserve themselves. The Vorthok were merely the latest in a long line of civilizations that had chosen survival over conscience. Your species is anomalous, it concluded. This behavior pattern is evolutionarily disadvantageous. It should have been eliminated by natural selection. Maybe that's exactly why it wasn't. Kale felt his life force being drained, his enhanced muscles beginning to atrophy as the entity fed. But he also felt something else, a resonance in the quantum foam that his neural implants were designed to detect. The children weren't the only humans in psychic contact with the entity. Across the galaxy, every human with even minor psionic potential was feeling echoes of this encounter, and they were responding. On Earth, in the outer colonies, aboard ships, traveling between the stars, humans were experiencing shared dreams of a man standing alone against something that wanted to devour everything they loved. Most would dismiss it as nightmares, but some would remember, some would prepare. Impossible, the entity snarled as it detected the growing psychic network. Individual sacrifice cannot generate species-wide behavioral modification. The mathematics do not support such rapid evolutionary adaptation. Kale laughed, tasting blood. You've been eating civilizations for so long, you forgot that some things can't be quantified. Love, hope, the stubborn human refusal to go gentle into that good night. The entity's feeding frenzy intensified, trying to drain him before he could complete whatever plan was forming in his disrupted neural patterns. But Kale had spent 15 years preparing for this moment, without realizing it. Every battle, every victory, every failure had been leading to this single act of defiance. His neural implants weren't just shorting out. They were overloading in a very specific pattern. The quantum cascade he was generating would resonate through subspace, carrying detailed information about the entity's nature and weaknesses to every human settlement in the galaxy. It would take decades for the information to be properly decoded and understood. But when it was, humanity would be ready for the entity's next awakening. You cannot sacrifice your consciousness to preserve your species. The entity protested, its feeding becoming more frantic. Individual organisms do not possess sufficient cognitive complexity to generate galaxy-spanning strategic initiatives. You're right, Kale admitted as his vision began to fade. Individual organisms don't. But we're not just individuals. We're part of something bigger than ourselves. Something you'll never understand, because you've never been anything but alone. The last thing he saw before the entity consumed his consciousness was the tunnel entrance. Empty now, except for a small piece of fabric torn from a child's clothing. The kids had made it out. They would remember what happened here. They would tell others. And somewhere, in a future he would never see, another human would stand between innocence and hunger, ready to pay whatever price was necessary to keep the darkness at bay. The entity finished its feeding and turned its attention to pursuing the escaped children. But something was wrong. Kale's sacrifice had triggered a quantum resonance that was spreading through the local space-time matrix like a virus. Information about the entity's nature, its feeding patterns, its dimensional anchor points, of it encoded in the quantum foam and broadcasting across the galaxy. For the first time in eons, the creature felt something it had almost forgotten: uncertainty. Perhaps these humans were more dangerous than they appeared. 57 years later, ... Captain Lyra Voss stood before the obsidian monument in Remembrance Square, reading the inscription carved in 17 different languages. The words were simple, but their meaning had shaped half a century of human expansion. Commander Kale Vex gave his life so that children might live. His sacrifice awakened humanity to the darkness between stars. We remember, we prepare, we endure. Around her, the memorial city of New Haven stretched toward the horizon, a testament to humanity's refusal to be consumed. The architecture was deliberately defensive, designed to withstand psychic assault as much as conventional warfare. Every building incorporated quantum resonance dampeners. Every citizen carried neural shields calibrated to specific extra-dimensional frequencies. The Vex protocols had seen to that. Captain. Her aide, Lieutenant Finn Torrens, approached with a datapad. The deep space monitoring stations are reporting anomalous quantum fluctuations in the Vorthok system. The patterns match the ones Commander Vex transmitted during the temple incident. Lyra nodded grimly. She'd been expecting this for months. The entity officially designated as hostile extra-dimensional organism, Kappa 1 had spent the last 57 years growing stronger, feeding on the remains of the Vorthok civilization. Now it was ready to resume its galactic tour, and humanity was next on the menu. But this time, they wouldn't be caught unprepared. Signal Admiral Chen at Fleet Command, Lyra ordered. Tell him it's time to implement Vex. The 7th Vex protocol was humanity's most ambitious undertaking. A coordinated psychic defense network spanning 300 worlds and 12 billion human minds. Every child born in the last 2 decades had been inoculated with quantum-entangled neural implants. Every adult had undergone voluntary consciousness modification to enhance their psionic resistance. The species that had once fought wars over resources and ideology had united around a single, terrifying purpose, ensuring that no human child would ever again cry out in helpless terror while adults did nothing. Ma'am, Torrens continued hesitantly, there's something else. The monitoring stations are also detecting massive quantum disruptions near the Kepler 442 system. Multiple dimensional breaches, consistent with coordinated entity manifestation. Lyra felt ice form in her stomach. Kepler 442 was where the entity had first made contact with humanity. during the colonial wars that had consumed Kale Vex's childhood. If it was returning there, it meant the creature was specifically targeting humans, not just consuming them opportunistically, but hunting them with predatory intelligence. How many breaches? 17 confirmed, with more appearing every hour. Fleet intelligence estimates the entity has divided itself into multiple autonomous segments. It's trying to overwhelm our defenses through simultaneous multi-vector assault. Standard military doctrine would call for strategic withdrawal, abandoning the outer colonies to protect Earth and the core worlds. But the Vex protocols had been written by people who understood that some lines could never be crossed, no matter the cost. Send word to all fleet elements, Lyra commanded. We're not falling back. Every human settlement is defended to the last ship, the last soldier, the last breath. The entity wants to feed on our children. It's going to choke on our defiance. As she spoke, she could feel it beginning, the quantum resonance that connected every human consciousness across the galaxy. 12 billion minds thinking as one, sharing strength and determination across the void. It was what Kale Vex had died to achieve, a species-wide immune response to predation. The entity had made a fundamental miscalculation. It had evolved to hunt civilizations that would sacrifice their young to preserve themselves. But humans were different. They were the species that ran into burning buildings to save strangers. They were the people who stood between monsters and innocence, even when they knew it would destroy them. Especially when they knew it would destroy them. Captain, Torrance said quietly, studying his datapad. I'm receiving personal messages. From across the fleet, volunteers for the suicide missions. Thousands of them. Lyra wasn't surprised. The Vex protocols hadn't just prepared humanity, militarily, they'd prepared them spiritually. Every person who'd grown up with the memorial cities, who'd learned the story of the temple incident, who'd been taught that their lives were worth sacrificing for the future of their species, they were all Kale Vex's children now. She looked up at the monument one more time, thinking of a man she'd never met, who'd died decades before she was born. His decision in that alien temple had cascaded through history like ripples on a pond, transforming an entire species from prey into predators. The entity thought it was hunting humans. It was about to discover that humans hunted back. Signal the fleet, she ordered. All ships, all stations, all settlements, use Kale Vex's words from the temple transmission. Nobody gets to use us as a battery. Then show these cosmic parasites what happens when they threaten our children. Across the galaxy, humanity's war fleets began their advance toward 17 different battlefields. They carried with them the hopes of 12 billion souls and the legacy of one man who'd chosen to stand when others knelt. The age of human passivity was over. The age of Vex had begun, and in the quantum foam between dimensions, something ancient and hungry began to understand what fear truly meant. The end.